So you've been hearing a lot of doom and gloom on the radio and on TV. The media continually says that a recession is imminent, and there just seems to be a lot of fear in the markets these days. But what about a recession? What does it mean specifically for the real estate market here in Seattle? Well, that's exactly what we're going to cover in today's video, and we're going to get after it right now. Hey there, my name is Jordan Reeder, your Seattle area real estate agent, and if you turn on the TV or you look online, you're going to see one thing, and it's that most Americans are filled with fear over a possible recession. But what exactly does that look like specifically when it comes to real estate? Are prices going to fall out of the sky? Well, to get to those answers, it's important to look at the past, and although history does not guarantee future results, it provides key reference points as we go through a similar experience. Now, I bet if I were to ask 10 people what a recession is, I would get 10 different answers. So first, let's look at some of the definitions. Now, there are many books out there that talk about what a recession actually is, and I've read some of them, but let's go to the best source to find out what a recession actually is, and that is Google. All right, so now let's look at the top 3 results. A recession is a significant decline in economic activity that lasts for months or even years. Experts declare a recession when a nation's economy experiences negative gross domestic product, rising levels of unemployment, falling retail sales, and contracting measures of income and manufacturing for an extended period of time. Okay, that was a pretty long explanation. Let's go on to the second one. All right, so here's the second definition. A recession is a decline in economic activity spread across the economy lasting more than a few months. Recessions are characterized by a drop in gross domestic product, higher unemployment, falling prices in financial markets. In the US, a recession is typically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. Let's go on to the third definition, and this one by far is my favorite. A recession is a serious decline in economic activity that lasts longer than a few months. It is measured by drops in these 5 economic indicators: real GDP, income, employment, manufacturing, and retail sales. So basically you have a drop in GDP due to decreasing demand, real income falls, consumers cut back on purchases, lowering demand, a fall in employment numbers, and an increase in requests for unemployment insurance. And then you have a drop in manufacturing activity and retail sales due to less demand. Okay, that by far is the best definition in my book, and that comes to you from Seeking Alpha. So we've talked about what causes a recession, but it's also important to know the stages of a recession so we know what to expect after a recession is over. So here are the 5 stages of a recession. Growth slows, the rate of employment falls, but prices stagnate, meaning they stay the same. You have your trough, which is when the economy hits that lowest point. You have recovery, where growth begins again. You have expansion, where the economy grows rapidly, interest rates are low, and production goes up. However, inflationary pressures are building. Sounds familiar? And then you have your peak, when growth hits its maximum rate, imbalances in the economy occur that will be corrected by a recession. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. And now that we have a good idea of what a recession is, what causes one, and what stages there are in a recession, the big questions remain. What does this all have to do with real estate here in Seattle? How will a recession affect pricing? Will the market crash? And should I still be buying and or selling right now? These are all fair questions, and it's also fair to say that no one can be 100% sure what's going to happen. But here is the whole idea of how a recession could play out in regards to real estate. If a recession were to hit, it could lower demand, especially if mortgage rates stay as high as they are right now or keep climbing, and that could in turn bring home prices down over time. Now, as I've stated in my other videos, which I will link up right here, buyers create the demand for housing, which is directly linked with price movement. When less buyers are coming into the market, that decrease in demand causes real estate prices to stagnate or fall. So let's say for any number of reasons, a recession actually hits. What would that look like for real estate prices here locally? Let's look at history and data to tell the story. Okay, so let's look at the first data point, interest rates, specifically the 30-year fixed rate mortgage during periods of recession since the 80s. And the reason why I show the interest rates is because this directly affects affordability and affects housing prices. Remember that when interest rates rise, buyer activity falls and real estate prices can stagnate or fall with it. The shaded areas are times of recession in the US. And look what happens to rates after recessions end. Interest rates rise during recession periods and then fall after. Here in 1990, it rose a little bit and fell all the way down, but look at 2008. If you look here, rates rose and then they fall down to their lowest level here in 2020. Again, this is all part of the economic cycle and is normal. This just illustrates that these cycles have been happening for our entire lives. You just want to recognize what's likely to happen during a recession as we move out of it into recovery. Okay, so here's unemployment during the last recession. Now, this is specific to our area here in Seattle, and this is important because this will directly affect whether or not people can afford their mortgage payments. Look at the shaded areas again. These are times during a recession. Unemployment tends to rise during a recession and then falls during recovery. You'll notice here in 2020, this is the pandemic, so this is obviously going to be a blip, and you'll notice it's fallen down to the lowest historical levels. Right now in Seattle, we have record low unemployment, which is good, but if a recession hits, we could see unemployment numbers rise a bit. It's very hard to say what might happen with unemployment here locally, but something to keep an eye on. All right, so the next data point is the consumer price index, or inflation. If people are spending all their money on gas, food, and other things, our dollar is simply devalued. It doesn't go as far, and people can't afford to pay their mortgage, which will affect housing prices. So look at what happens before recessions of the past. Inflation is elevated, recession follows, inflation then comes down, and the cycle repeats all over again. Yes, this means that your dollar simply doesn't go as far as it once did. However, it does not mean that inflation will remain forever. So affordability typically returns during times of recovery, as you can see in this graph. And the final data point is the housing price index in the Seattle metro area. Again, shaded areas are going to represent times of recession. So take a look at this graph. Contrary to popular belief, you'll notice that most recessions since the 80s have resulted in very little equity erosion. Home prices tend to stagnate or stay the same during most recessions here in our local area. There is one exception, and that is here in 2008 when we had the housing crisis. Now, during that time, there was a lot of pain. Housing prices did correct quite a bit, as you can see here, but the problems we're facing today are much different. I would encourage you all to go back and understand exactly what happened during that housing crisis of 2008. So you have all these cycles happening at once. When it comes to real estate in general, a huge factor in all of this is whether or not people are able to afford their mortgage payments. This is the reason why it's important to take a look at historical patterns during the recessions of the past. So what's the point of all this, right? What am I trying to illustrate here? This is all to say that all these economic factors occur in a cycle. Now, it's very difficult to know exactly what's going to happen next. I'm just a real estate agent that likes to keep the pulse on the market and on the economy, but I'm not an economist. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. After looking at the data and history, there are a few things that are starting to become clear. Number one, the housing market is slowing. Inventory is rising. Houses are sitting on the market for longer. There is less buyer activity due to high interest rates and other factors. Number two, a recession is becoming more likely. Considering everything that is going on with inflation, which has hit all-time highs recently, it's going to be harder and harder for the Fed to orchestrate a soft landing, so economic activity will most likely slow. But number three, the Seattle real estate market is strong, especially before, during, and even after times of recession. Yes, there are indicators pointing to a real estate slowdown here in Seattle, but a slowdown is much different than a crash. Unemployment rates are very low, as I showed you. People have more equity than they ever have. Most people tend to be able to afford their mortgage payments here, and they have more resources to tap into if they are having financial trouble. So out of the last 5 recessions, housing prices here have come out relatively flat, except for, again, in 2008, when prices went down significantly, but came back to equilibrium in about 2012, which is just 4 years later. So to sum things up, things are going to hurt for a while, right? Your dollar is not going as far. Inflation will continue to ravage the US. You'll probably think twice about buying that new house, that new car, or whatever else you spend your money on. But with all that being said, 1 year from now could be a completely different story. When it comes to real estate here in Seattle, it is my opinion that equity will not vanish. Prices should flatten and continue to rise at a much lower pace than we've seen over the past few years. Worst case scenario, prices correct a few percentage points at most here in Seattle. But when we move out of that trough into recovery, a small correction will just seem like a blip because supply and demand is always undefeated. Prices should continue to go up over time. So my quick message for buyers, especially the fatigued ones, now is your time. Go find a house that has been listed for 2 weeks, ask for some concessions. Look for those houses that may be overpriced and go for the deal. It's still a seller's market. However, we are shifting toward a more balanced market. It's still a great time to buy as long as you're looking for long-term appreciation, not short-term speculation. My message for sellers, the time of getting 15 offers and just a crazy buying frenzy is over for right now. So price your home fairly and come up with a selling plan that has your buyer in mind. There are still buyers out there, but they'll only be willing to bite if they feel like they're getting a fair deal. The moment that they feel the house is overpriced or it's not worth it, they're going to walk. So I hope this video provided some good information about recessions and how one will likely affect the market here in Seattle. I'm putting my contact information right here, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out at any time. My goal is to help people like you learn more about this area, and I'd love to be your resource for all things real estate here in Seattle. So give me a call, shoot me a text, or email me anytime. And with that, now that you've just learned everything you need to know about recessions, be sure to watch this video next, where I will show you what's going on in the Seattle real estate market in 2022. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.